right, get your note sheet ready and get ready to take notes, because I'm going to be looking at your notes and I'm going to see if you were paying attention. And this is basically, we're telling a story that's working into a diagnostic thing. I was working at the Ford dealer. There was a relative of mine that brought her her 1984 Marquis, and this is years ago when those cars weren't that old, for a transmission service. And the car is given no trouble. She brings it in for a transmission service. They put it on the lift. The guy that did the thing was a guy that was a really good transmission mechanic. He raised it up, he pulled the pin, and he did the filter and all this stuff like you do when you do a transmission service. She gets in, she leaves, she gets down at the red light, and all of a sudden there's transmission fluid all over the highway out there. This sounds like a repeat repair, doesn't it? Well, this is a simple transmission service. I saw the guy doing it. He didn't do anything wrong. He put it all together. That guy didn't particularly have comebacks. You know what I mean? He was really good. So she brought it back up there, and he was kind of swamped, and they were, kind of putting her on the back burner and all. But since she was a relative of mine, I pulled the car in there and I raised it up on the lift. And the transmission cooler lines that come out of the transmission go to the radiator? The torque converter is where the heat's created in the transmission. So when it leaves the torque converter, it goes to the cooler in the radiator, and it comes back and it goes into the pan. That particular little roll crimp thing where it clicked into the fitting had cracked, and that was long yonder and gone from where he worked. So he had nothing to do with that. He did not cause this problem. And I think some of us in here, if you've done a lot of live work, you'll see one that will come back. Some of the stuff that comes back is our fault, some of it's not. I mean, it's just the way it is when you're working in a shop and there's a lot of different people doing the work. 25 mechanics were in that shop down there, and you see stuff come back all the time, but it's stuff a lot of the time that you had nothing to do with. So I went ahead and fixed it, and we filled it up with fluid and sent her on her way. There was no problem on that. She didn't get charged anything. And I even told him, since she was my relative, that I would, pay for the fluid. And the service manager says, no, don't worry about that. It wasn't anything anybody did wrong. So anyway, this particular, another problem that we had one time, we pulled the transmission out of a Chevy Blazer, S10 Blazer, a little 96 model. Pulled it out for a leak, an oil leak. So pulled it out, fixed the oil leak, put it back in. I think it was rear main seal or something. We popped it back in there, and we went to, he left with it, and then he came back and he says, I can't get my hatch open. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the key part of it hasn't worked for years. He said, I know there's nothing there. He said, but I have been opening it with the hatch button inside, but now it doesn't work at all. Everything else is fine, but it doesn't work. And I said, okay, well, how's that got anything to do with what we did? Anybody know? I mean, can you come up with anything? Well, when you consider the fact that it won't open when you're in drive, it'll only open in park or neutral, and the guy didn't plug this neutral safety switch back in all the way. He thought he did, but those gummy junk that's in those GM connectors on those things kept him from plugging it back. He got it plugged back into where it would start, the reverse lights would work and all, but it wasn't providing a ground for the actuator and the tailgate, so when you push the button, the guy didn't have no hatch operation. Now, why don't they want the hatch opening when you're in drive? You don't want to lose your ice chest, your kids, and your dogs and all going down the road by accidentally punching that button, boom, and the thing opens up, right? You don't want the hatch opening up while you're driving. Stuff falls out in front of other cars and all this kind of thing. So, didn't sound like it was our fault, but it was. Another story. One time my sister, 77 Caprice that she was driving, my dad pulls it into his shop to replace the brake pads. Simple as pie. Jacks it up, throws the stands under it, pulls the wheels off, puts brake pads on it, puts it back together, sets it down, pulls it out. She gets in it, the radio won't work. She said, well, I was listening to the radio when I dropped it off out here. This is my sister and my dad, right? And so she says, the radio don't work. What's up with this? And he says, I don't know. And so I pulled the radio loose from the dash, and when I was holding the radio where it wouldn't touch the dash, it wouldn't blow the fuse, because it blew the fuse what it did. But when I touched the dash with the radio, it blew the fuse, so I took the top off the radio and found a shorted capacitor, great big old thing in there. And it was looked like a condenser out of a distributor the way it was made, but it was part of the radio, and it was shorted internally. When I cut the wire going to that, it didn't blow a fuse anymore. And so when I took it to the radio shop downtown, he put another one in there. But anyway, the long and short of it is comebacks. Stuff that comes back. Okay, now here there was a Mitsubishi Raider that went to another shop for an engine skip under a load. The owner said the other shop had replaced the ignition switch at a cost of $400, and this is the kind of thing that Adam had some experience with place, the guy that we want to have fix his car one time. But the engine skip remained the same. All right, in my way of thinking, cheap and easy is the best first move. Cheap and easy, cheap and easy. That's what I was telling you, right? You do what's cheap and easy first. If the engine is overheating and you don't see anything blatantly wrong, and it's fairly easy to throw a thermostat in there, throw a thermostat at it. Make sure it's full of coolant, throw a thermostat at it. See if it takes care of it. If it doesn't, then you need to look a little deeper. But don't, go in there and pull the heads off without actually doing the other stuff. Okay, all it took to fix that truck was a set of spark plugs. Now, when we're through with all this, I'm going to show you some pictures on the overhead, of all of the stuff I'm talking about here. Okay, so that was pretty obvious, cheap and easy. We put it in there. I don't know why they put a $400 ignition switch on it. I'm sure they had their reasons, and I know that shop, and I have respect for the guy that owns it, but it was a peculiar situation. Hyundai Santa Fe, inoperative air conditioner due to a dead evaporator sensor. This is the evaporator sensor from that particular Hyundai right here. The evaporator sensor is there for what reason? What's the evaporator sensor there for? Anybody remember? Some of you guys have done air conditioning. You don't want the air conditioner evaporator to freeze up. So you put a sensor in there, and when the temperature goes down to below, about 32 degrees, this thing kills the compressor. Well, if this thing dies, the compressor will never come on. This thing had been to a Hyundai dealership about 4 times, and they had replaced the compressor and a bunch of other stuff, and they had like $3,000 or $4,000 invested in this deal. This is the one that Moody pulled the dash out of and put the sensor in. Well, we actually did the diagnostics on the panel, pushed the buttons, and it came up and told us this was bad. And it was $28 for one of these. Well, we put that in there and took care of the problem, right? Well, then there's these circumstantial landmines. We get a simple repair. The job goes south to the point that it feels like a T-Rex is coming here, and he wants to bite us on the bottom. Here we got to find out what went wrong fast, and then sometimes we got to find out. We find out the situations that want to blindside us and make us think we're incompetent. You ever make a mistake when you were doing something that made you think you were losing it? You know what I mean? I have. You may not have, but I have. You should have thought you were losing it, but you didn't. Okay, that's what it was. Like something really, really simple that you missed, that you should have caught. And some of you have already heard me talking about Gene's truck actually was losing his airflow going down the road, and he was also talking about it killing his battery, and it turned out the AC compressor clutch relay is keeping the compressor in all the time, and it was freezing up the evaporator. All those problems were tied together. And Gene was asking me, do you suppose this AC clutch relay could be the cause of my airflow problem? And I says, no, I don't see how. And then I got to thinking after Mr. Price over there pulled the fan out, we were looking for leaves in the evaporator. So wait a minute, if this compressor's running all the time, it's going to freeze that up like a brick and we're going to lose airflow. So anyway, think clearly. Well, there's a foreign exchange student that bought this particular car I'm about to talk about at the local GM dealer. Some of you people were involved with this. Got it for a pretty decent price to drive for the year she's going to be here. The AC was inoperative and the low coolant message was displayed on the message center, but other than a couple of burned out stop lamp bulbs, it was in really good shape. So we give it a good once over at the end of that work week, check the coolant concentration and the availability of a coolant level sensor, and then attack the AC for a preliminary. So when you're doing the AC, you pull the air out of the AC. If it's gone atmospheric, if all the refrigerant's gone and it's full of air, you check it. If it's completely atmosphere, you just pull all of that out, and then you're going to put some dye in there, then you're going to put a normal charge in it, and whenever they drive it and it starts to leak again, you put your black light on it and you see it. Well, in this particular case, the compressor looked like it was radioactive when we put the black light under it. This came back. This was gone from Thursday until the following Monday, right? And the AC had already got to where it wasn't cooling good again, so this was a pretty bad leak. But the thing about it is it held vacuum really good. How can it hold vacuum really good but still leak refrigerant that quickly?
Bad seals?
Well, yeah, but I mean, the simple thing of it is it can hold vacuum but still leak under pressure. Because on the high side, you can have like 300 pounds of pressure. See what I mean? And there's also compressor. The compressor is a real common leak point, particularly on those Buicks, And that's what this was. It was a 98 Buick Park Avenue. All right, she had gone for the weekend. Well, when it came back, the low coolant message had been joined by a trunk jar message, and the AC's refrigerant charge had mostly gone away. So we put a coolant level sensor in it, took care of the low coolant message, but the trunk jar light was still there. And this is on the little display in the middle of the dash. I don't know if yours has that or not.
No.
But it's actually got the little words in there that says trunk jar. All right, so we got went ahead and, you know, put a compressor on it and that kind of thing. But so we did that, and we got nice, good refrigerant in it, but the compressor would never even engage. Everything was fine as far as the circuits and all, but it wouldn't engage. That was fun, wasn't it? While we were investigating that, one of my guys noticed the temperature needle was kind of near the red line, and then the cooling fans weren't working. Now, none of this was the case on Thursday. We go through a Friday and a weekend. Might have been a long weekend, I don't remember, but the next week, all of these new problems had happened. That's why I called this particular article, when I wrote it for Motor Age, Change Without Notice. Because now this stuff, now she's a foreign exchange student, and she doesn't have a really heavy language barrier, but at the same time, she really doesn't know who she can trust. You know what I'm saying? And we're selling her, and I'm saying, we have sold her a compressor because it was leaking. We didn't sell her anything we didn't need. You know, I always like to back up and think about this. Have I sold them something they didn't need? Do I need to roll this back? But no, she needed it because it was leaking, but now it won't engage. And so here we are working on that. Well, all of this stuff happened. You know, the needle, the cooling fans were working fine when she left and all that. Now, you know, this actually, and this is really what's important to remember, we could have destroyed the engine by letting this go, by assuming, oh, well, whatever, and just threw it together and put it out. If the AC had been working but the fans weren't working, you know, we could have let it out there and she could have cooked her motor. See, so it's really a good idea to check this thing. You know how whenever I tell you, whenever you've done the cooling, whenever you drain the coolant and all that kind of stuff, you're going to actually let the fan kick off and on 4 times, you know, to make sure that it's just right. Because if it kicks on and stays on, you got a problem. In other words, it's supposed to be able to cool it down to where it kicks back off. Unless you got your AC on, then it's going to run all the time, in most cases. Well, I put a couple of guys to work on the trunk jar message to see if that switch back there was lying. They didn't find anything wrong. All right, so I had to call the owner and tell her you can't have the car back right now because if you drive it, you'll ruin it. You got it? You understand what I'm saying? You don't give it back to them. Even if they're squawking and saying, I got to have my car, I got to have my car. You say, well, I'm not going to release it because you'll fry things. You'll destroy stuff. It's kind of like if somebody comes in for a brake job. And we've had them come in for a brake job before. There's one lady coming here for the brake job, and she says, can you put brakes on my Grand Cherokee or whatever it was? And I said, sure. So she brings it in, and so I gave her a price, and the guy at the parts house never asked me if it had anti-lock brakes or anything. He just said, yeah, they're $29 per, you know, for the rotor and all that. So she comes in. Not only did we find out that the rotors weren't the right ones, but she had a bunch of missing brake hardware and stuff put together with haywire and all this kind of junk. So we pull the wheels off and we're looking at this. This is a disaster. And furthermore, the rotors are $50 a piece. They're not $29. And he didn't even ask me. He says, well, this has ABS on it. You know, he said, well, you know, I don't know. My book didn't say anything. And so now I'm kind of in hot water with her because she thought it was going to cost a little bit. Now it's going to cost a lot. Furthermore, I forgot to tell her about the $25 worth of brake hardware. That was my fault. But anyway, she wasn't really happy. But at the same time, what if she just said, I don't want any of that work. Just put it back together like it was. Who's responsible if the brakes fail, even though you put it back together like it was? You are, because you should never let one go out of the shop with brakes cobbled together, even if it came in that way. See what I'm saying? Huh?
Detrimental to whoever you're working for as well.
Yeah.
Your integrity and...
Yeah, well, basically, the person that's running the shop is the one that's going to have to make that call. But this is just common sense, you know. I mean, even if I heard about a shop one time that made this lady sign a release and tell her your brakes are not safe. She said, well, I'm taking my car, you can stick it in your ear. Give me my car. And she was throwing a fit, and they says, fine. They made her sign a release, and she pulled out there, and the brakes failed, and she ran into a pole and bent her car up, and she sued the place and won because they let the car go, and the release she signed meant nothing. See what I mean? Disable the vehicle so somebody else has to put it back together. So you can send a wrecker here after it, but I'm not putting the wheels back on it. I'm not putting the brakes back together. You can take it like it is, but you're not driving it out of here. Somebody's going to come on a wrecker and haul it. You know. And now if you're working for a shop and the shop owner doesn't have any more sense than to let it go with bad brakes, that's on him. But you tell him, I'm off. I'm out of here. You know, on this situation. All right. So I held the car. The 3 fan relays, though, I noticed, had all been replaced at some point because they were a different brand. So somebody, before she bought this car at the used car place, had had this problem before. It had been apparently a come and go problem, and it bit us because we didn't see it the first time. Well, we got a two-way talk and scan tool. We told the PCM to turn on the fans, and it did. It was able to turn the fans on. We hooked the test light in a series with the fans, turned them through. They didn't go dark any kind of a way. The engine coolant sensor disconnected. The PCM would also activate the fans, although at low speed. What we knew now was everything was in place as far as drivers, circuits, good relays, and good fans. The PCM was able to turn the fans on. That's what a two-way talk and scan tool is about. Can the PCM turn on the fans? Tell it to turn on the fan. Boom. But it would not turn them on its own. Even though it saw the temperature going into the stratosphere, it would not turn the fans on. Now, what in the Sam Hill is this about? Well, I actually came up with another engine controller just for the heck of it. You know, I mean, the old car didn't cost much. Popped it in there, didn't change the dadgum thing. I even had to reflash it. I reflashed it to make sure that it had the latest software. Didn't do a doggone bit of good. Everything's the same way. We dialed in a temperature of 267 degrees with a potentiometer hooked into the engine coolant sensor. 267 degrees, it still wouldn't turn the fan on. I mean, and that's hot enough to cook it, you know.
But wouldn't it be a faulty sensor right there? Maybe it's still closed and it's not sending the sensor back to the PCM.
Well, whenever I called the Identifix hotline was telling me to measure this voltage and all that kind of stuff, I put another sensor in it. It didn't cost much either. It didn't change a daggum thing. Everything did like it was. All right, so it's out. This is good. This is a good story, man. This just smack you around. As for the air conditioner, the scan tool showed the control head was sending a request and that the body control module was receiving that request, but that's where the request stopped. The body control module was seeing a request for AC, but it would never turn on the air conditioner compressor. So we didn't have fans, we didn't have AC compressor, even though we had a new compressor on there, and I'm over here, you know, scratching my head trying to figure this out. And so this is not a voltage deal you can measure. There are some things you cannot measure in real time with your meter. Like one thing, I'll call it fuel injection, fuel trim. You cannot measure fuel trim with anything except a scan tool, right? It's like on the older scan tools, they call it block, learn, and integrator, and it was on a 0 to 255 scale, 128 in the middle. You can't measure that with anything except a doggone scan tool. And this is the same thing. This is a software deal. You got a scan tool talking to a module, and it's actually receiving a signal. If it's telling, and there's a couple of modules in there behind the glove box too, you know, and one of them's the body controller, and the other one is the HVAC programmer. And they look almost just alike, only one of them has pink connectors. Somewhere in here I had some of that stuff laying here. Anyway, I ain't gonna worry about that right now. Here we are. Ignorance is not bliss. When I got a really tough one like this, I like to work on it when nobody else is around. When there's no students, when the shop's closed, when I'm here by myself, like on a Friday morning, I just batten everything down and I think about this and I ruminate on it and all that kind of stuff. And I discovered, you know, I had also went to the salvage yard and got a BCM. Right? I says, I need a BCM for this 98 Buick. Yeah, we got one. It'll be $30. So I put it on the counter. I gave him a purchase order and all that. Came in here, put it in, nothing changed. All that kind of thing. And then I discovered that the BCM the salvage yard had given me was not the BCM. They had given me an HVAC programmer. And these things they don't have the words on them. You know what I'm saying? When you're looking at them, you see a box. And it's up here in the place where the book says this thing is, because the things are piggyback mounted side by side. And you say, well, I guess the junkyard knows what they're giving me, and so I put this on there, and now your problem's still there, you know, which is pretty goofy. So he handed me I handed them back the HVAC programmer when I went back there the next day, and they handed me the right part, which had pink connectors, you know. So they didn't give me a BCM, they gave me a programmer. I plugged that one into the Buick in my service bay. Now listen to this. When I plugged in the replacement BCM, you didn't have to reprogram it or nothing on that one. It was a plug and play. The AC worked. The cooling fan started to operate normally. The trunk and jar warning light went away to be replaced by a change oil soon light. All of that was because of the body computer. And you could not go into the body computer and pull a code or find anything wrong. Now, how the Sam Hill am I supposed to figure this out? You know what I mean? I've actually got another article that I wrote. I actually typed an email in my technical editor at Motor Age one time, crazy electronics, stupid stuff that goes wrong. It's not in any book anywhere, but you're the guy that said the buck stops here because you got to fix this thing. And I had one that was where I had a dadgum Mustang. It was like a 99 model. And they says, the fob won't work. So On the Fords of that vintage, you turn the key on about 8 times, and then the door locks go whoomp whoomp, and then you mash the button on the fob, and they go whoomp whoomp, another fob whoomp whoomp, and you've programmed them. You switch it off, now your fobs ought to work. Well, on this one, it wouldn't. I'd turn it on, whoomp whoomp, and it would work when I mash it to program it, but when I switch the car off, the fob still wouldn't work. This doesn't make sense. I know this fob putting out a signal, I know the thing's receiving it. Why am I not getting this? So I call the hotline after reflashing this stupid gem module, because that's what the special service message said to do. That didn't change nothing either. And the guy says, wait a minute, I worked on that when that system was being developed. I forgot about that. He says, unplug fuse number 8 and leave it out of there, whatever the fuse number was, for about 30 seconds, and then plug it back in and your door lock should work. So I did that, and they worked. How am I supposed to know that? How am I supposed to figure that out? Well, it's similar to the Dodge Caravan that came in here, that the door locks wouldn't work with a fob and they wouldn't work with the switches, right? Okay, and so I go to pull the scan tool in, plug it up. I'm getting signals for lock and unlock from my switches. I'm getting signals from my fob that I can see on the screen, but the door locks are totally inoperative. But if you go out here and you take both battery cables loose from the battery, touch them together for about 20 seconds or whatever, put them back on, now the door locks are back online. What are you doing? You're rebooting the microprocessor in that computer. You know, it's just like your PC. You know how sometimes your PC goes stupid and you got to reboot it? The same thing happens in the computers in the car, so don't fall into that. Okay, we're working our way to the end of this right here. The people with a lot of GM trench experience that had worked on a lot of these cars might have a better feel for that. They may have known right away if the fan's not working, the AC won't come on, everything else is normal, put a BCM in it. And make sure you don't put an HVAC programmer instead of the BCM in it. The HVAC programmer, let me tell you what that is. That's a box that takes information from the climate control, like when you're dialing in the temperature that you want it to be. The programmer is the brains behind that. And even that 71 Cadillac Eldorado has got a programmer in it that they call it an HVAC program, but it's a big old ugly thing under there. And it actually, when you dial that little wheel and tell it what temperature, it's what turns the compressor on and off and operates the door so you hit that target temperature. It reads the temperature inside the car, it controls the compressor, it controls the doors and all that, and it's got vacuum lines coming out of it and all that kind of thing. Well, after the oil change was done, the bill was paid, the Buick driver got her wheels back and everything is working really smooth, and 2 weeks later, she was back with harsh transmission shifts. Bam, it would slam. Oh no, I'm gonna have to have a transmission. And also would stall, and she wanted her brakes checked. The transmission had harsh 2, 3, and 3, 4 shifts, and it would stall sometimes in parking lot maneuvers, and the mill was on with a mass airflow sensor code we hadn't previously seen. The data stream showed mass airflow readings at about 1,000 hertz lower than accurate, and I put a mass airflow sensor in there, and all of the problems went away. The transmission shifted good, the stalling was gone. You see what I'm saying? I mean, you see where this is what we deal with in the here and now. That's a 98 model car. How old is a 98 model car now?
17 years.
Yeah, 17 years. You were born in about 1998, am I right, or something? Or after that? So what I'm saying is, that car was as old as she is, and the thing was actually, this much electronic stuff had gone south that you could not just figure out real easy. There was another lady that swore she had torn her transmission up because the car stalled on her and she slammed it in park while it was still moving, and she brought it in here and she was worried sick the transmission was fried because it wasn't working right, and we put a mass airflow sensor on that one and she had no more trouble with it. I mean, we actually did some troubleshooting to figure it out. But for the brakes, we put a full set of pads and all the rotors on there. We measured, machined everything. The pulsation was gone, so she was talking about brake pulsation. And maybe it'll last her a year before we have to do any more work on it. But anybody got anything to say about that, or any questions or comments? What's that?
You know, you're talking about the mass airflow sensor.
Yeah.
Taking transmission on shift, right?
Yep.
Like a cam sensor to do that.
Not likely. What kind of vehicle?
So Dodge.
Why are you thinking it might be the cam sensor?
Because that's the only code it throws.
That was, if you've got a Dodge Dakota with a transmission problem, it's not likely to be an engine sensor causing that, because the transmissions on those vehicles are sort of crazy anyway. Now, direct your attention to the screen behind you up there. I'm going to show you pictures. This right here is the the website, you know, all that stuff is okay, and I can actually see this is basically giving us the stuff, and it's doing a slideshow, which I don't really like that. We can pause that. That's really hard to see. I didn't know, I hadn't seen one go that little. Let me pause that. See that pink connector body controller? That's the one I needed. The one they gave me had different color connectors on it. All right, and there's the fans. We were looking at that. I needed to make my internet bigger where you can see that. There's the trunk of jar light for what it's worth. The way they got that thing set up. This was what was going on afterwards. It went down, you know, when the temperature went down and the fans would kick off, then they'd kick back on like they were supposed to. You might notice the captions for these pictures are popping up in front of that. And I was trying to get it to where I could get it to pause. You could actually, looking at the data stream, hold on a second. Let me go down here. This right here is the data stream picture. When that goes down, I'm going to stop it. All right, let me see if I can make that bigger. Hold on here. I'm going to zoom. You see the way those switches are reading? Commanded AC is off. We know, looking at that. We're basically in one of the modules looking at that. High side pressure is giving us that. AC pressure out of range. Ignition 1. Now, if you went into the engine controller, you were getting this. If you went into the body controller, it was telling you the AC was actually being told to come on. So they weren't. And why the body controller was preventing the engine controller from turning the fans on was a total mystery to me, and still is. Because the engine controller, I mean, how can the body controller tell the engine controller not to turn on the fans? That don't make any sense to me. Why would it even be set up that way? I mean, I don't think that's wise. That electronic thing could have destroyed that motor. All right. Let me get out of this. Those pictures right there, I should have zoomed in before I showed them to you. But you get the point. You can actually go, and this is what we're going to be doing in Special Topics, is doing war stories. There's a lot of concentrated information I can give you when I go through what we went through troubleshooting. And when I'm reading what I wrote about it, it makes me able to remember stuff that I would have probably forgotten otherwise. And so sometimes, have you ever seen the people with the murder board on the CSI stuff? They got the board like this, and they got pictures and stuff on there. Sometimes you just need to get a pad, and you need to write down, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this reading over here. These won't come on. Make you some notes, and just sit there and think about it. Because a lot of the times I fix stuff that way, you know, without having to throw a bunch of parts at it. Now, a lot of times what people will do is they'll just say, well, I think I'll put this on it, and this on it, and this on it, and this on it. And Adam had a problem down in Florida, what was it, a couple of years ago, where his Buick wouldn't start. And so he calls the mobile mechanic to come over there, and the guy gets in there and throws a starter on it. And it turned out, he could have took the starter off and bench tested it to see if that was a problem, but he just put a starter on it. But it turned out, you know the keys that's got the little resistor pellet in them?
Yeah.
He's got a little resistor pellet right there. Okay, that little resistor pellet, the little contacts on either side of that resistor pellet will wear out so that when you stick it in there, it's not making contact, and that little module down there won't let the starter operate because it thinks somebody's got a key that's not right for the car that they've just cut to fit it. See what I mean? There's only like 8 different resistor pellets, I think. Well, that's the problem he was having with his. The little resistor pellet wasn't making contact in there. And that was one of the things that triggered his notion that, you know, I need to learn how to fix stuff, because if you hire somebody to fix stuff, everybody in here knows a horror story, right? Here's another one. You had, and this is fun to talk about, because he would gas up his little that Rondo that he's got. When he gassed it up, it would not start for about 20 minutes. Every time? Was it every time? Every time he put gas in it, it wouldn't start for 20 minutes. Now, some of you guys already know what's wrong with it. But basically, we went to Identifix, and it pointed us in the direction of the canister purge. We pull the canister purge solenoid off of there, and you could blow through it, because it's got two places for hoses, and it's got little wires. You could blow through it, and then we energize it, and you could still blow through it. That tells me right there it's no good. So he put another one on there and problem gone, no more issues. Why is this? Why is it that that one little canister purge valve can make it? Think about this, you're gassing it up, you got a bunch of vapor in the gas tank, right? And you're basically filling up the gas tank, you're pushing that vapor, and it's going all the way through that hose